Hang on. Now you're good.
We're going to go ahead and start this meeting. Start with item 21, which is the budget training workshop for the board commissioners. Informational only. This is Pool Pack Chief Financial Officer Alan Humboldt will provide a detailed training regarding government finance for the board of commissioners and the county manager.
Okay. Very well. We're unmiked and ready to go. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you, Comptroller Gina Rackley, for purposes of the record. So I want to start off by saying thank you to Alan Colt for braving the weather and the storm and to come out here and do this presentation. So Alan worked for Churchill County as their comptroller for a long time. It's kind of funny is when he was he was the comptroller there, was right shortly after I started working for Bruce Brooks in the comptroller's office here, and they all called Bruce Uncle Bruce, so we were cousins, I guess. So to me, it's real rewarding to look upon people that have been doing public government finance for as long as Alan has, and kind of help me maybe a little bit too. Last year at budget time, I expressed my frustrations with Alan that it was a 3-2 vote, and so I felt like maybe it was on me and that I need to do a better job presenting what the process is and how we get here. And Alan offered his services. Pool Pact does this for many counties, and he took a lot of time and tweaked and put in our numbers, tweaking this presentation. So again, thank you, Alan, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Gina. Uncle Bruce and I go back. He worked for the city of Reno. And I got hired on Churchill County during the fair share wars between Clark County and Washoe County. Churchill got stuck in the middle of the apportionment of, at that time, the SCCRT and BCCRT, and now today it's known as consolidated tax. And Guy Hobbs, Kathy Ong from Clark County, Mary Walker from Carson City, and Bruce Brooks from the city of Reno quickly became my mentors. My county manager, Bjorn Solender, threw me in, the legislative process with these folks at a very young age, and they mentored me. And I feel my role as part of Pool Pact is help mentoring others, just like those folks did for me. One of the things that I've done in my career is I've served on the Committee on Local Government Finance for 18 years. 18 years, and they found someone much brighter, much better looking to replace me to represent the rurals. It's your very own Gina Rackley.
Here, here.
Took my position on the committee. So, yeah, I love Humboldt County. A great community. We enjoy it. My daughter has played a ton of softball out here, and we've recreated. And actually, my son and I went hunting with Gina and her husband, a long time ago. So, yeah, very near and dear. Thank you for taking the time. As I was driving up, I was on the phone listening, and I was so proud of your auditors. And I jokingly told Gina that I sat in on your audit committee because she went through your audit reports like you would if you had a formal audit committee, and it took over an hour. I mean, I wasn't timing it, but she started before Lovelock and finished a long time. She did a great job, her and her team. So that's going to help make my presentation, instead of being 8 hours, I think I'm going to be able to do it in 6 because of what she's done. That's good. I'll be done much quicker than that.
You like the lights on and off?
If I'm, it's because I also heard as I was listening, one of you has to hit the road back, so I will go rather quickly. But at the same time, I want this to be informal. This presentation is for you guys. As Gina said, I was at Churchill County for over 26 years, made it through the Great Recession, and all we had to do was have one full-time employee turn to a half-time employee, whereas North Las Vegas laid off 48% of their people, damn near half, okay? Because we had financial leadership in place where we have set money aside. We set money aside in the rainy day fund, the extraordinary repairs and maintenance fund, capital projects fund, the risk management fund, compensated absence, unemployment, in those areas. We set money aside in the library fund to build up that ending fund balance in library and in Parks and Rec to build that fund up. Just like your auditors talked about today, well, gosh, you lowered your balance in your library fund. Okay, I don't know this for a fact, but I can speculate that was a plan designed by your management team. Okay, you build up those funds, and then how you apportion your property taxes, whether it's to the library, to the general fund, to all these other places, you can use your ending fund balance as a teeter-totter in your budget process. So let's jump into budget development. When we look at budget development, what Gina and Dave and the senior leadership trying to do is trying to balance those unlimited wants to limited resources. You know, you guys don't have unlimited resources in the same way. When I was down in Boulder City helping them, getting them set up, you know, and helping them, they have solar lease projects that is almost like net proceeds of mine for you guys in Lander County, probably closer to Lander County because they're getting significant lease revenues from solar projects in their community. But they still have unlimited wants. They have a fire department that wants to build a new station because it's the right thing to do on the other side of town. The other side of town in Boulder City is shorter than the other side of town in Winnemucca. So I just look at that and I kind of shake my head with all due respect. And public safety typically is the #1 priority for local governments. Okay, I respect that, I understand that, and that's what we did in Churchill, you know, between the sheriff's office, fire department, the search and rescue, those type of things. But we don't have an unlimited checkbook. Humboldt County doesn't have an unlimited checkbook. City of Winnemucca doesn't have an unlimited checkbook. So it forces us to do some planning, some looking at a criteria and an evaluation of how we want to do that. So you guys, your goal is to set the priorities and how are we going to allocate those funds? You know, that biggest pie there, and these, I took these off your audited financial statements. Gina gave me a copy on Friday. So I was able to put some, over the weekend, put some actual numbers into play to see where you're spending your dollars. So you can see public safety, #1, you know, then general government, intergovernmental, you know, the orange, and then public works, okay? So we set priorities. You guys set priorities. What do the residents, you know, of your county want? So how do we figure that out? Well, we got input, right? You got input by the community, you know, whether it's Orvada that you guys want to talk about, you know, hey, get their input on, you know, on their issues that are up there dealing with NDOT, okay? Community input, elected officials input, you folks, clearly the leadership role, and then you have your other elected officials, you have your department heads, you got your management team, you know, and you got oversight boards. You know, I'm not sure if you guys operate in that way where you have oversight boards, whether it be the Park and Rec Commission, the Library Board, the Cemetery Board, those type of things that provide guidance and input. But you got to take all of that input, but ultimately at the end of the day, the goal is 5-0. In Churchill County, it was 3-0. We had 3 commissioners. Okay, my goal was 3-0. You know, 5-0, let's get the budget adopted and approved and all 5 signatures, you know, in affirmative on the final budget. And, you know, ultimately that's the goal, to make sure that we heard and understand every one of your priorities. And did we build a budget that fixes the priorities that you folks have? And if not, where did we mess up? You know, so clearly we got to have our goals and our objectives. You know, we develop broad statements of what Humboldt County stands for, what you guys want to achieve, where your priorities are. And then objectives, how we're going to get there. How are we going to get there? Especially with limited resources, you know, pick on for a minute the road departments and RTC and gas tax revenue and trying to build and maintain all the road miles that rural Nevada has to offer on limited resources. And thank goodness diesel tax came into the formula. That was a tough decision. Very tough decision to impose that. Okay, you know what's really interesting on that, and I'll digress for a second, but sometimes telling a story, you get the bigger picture, is in Nevada, Washoe County was the first one that voted for fuel indexing. Fuel indexing, they had the Spaghetti Bowl was all jacked up, Interstate 80 was all jacked up, you couldn't get out to Pyramid Lake, you couldn't get out to Vista, okay, during 2005 and 6, during that growth period. So they worked with the Associated General Contractors, and they went to the vote of the people. They did an ad campaign saying, hey, this will create jobs. We need to take care of our road infrastructure. So they took it to the board. They took it to the ballot. People in Washoe County said, yeah, we want to pay this extra tax. We'll pay this extra tax for building and maintaining roads. Okay. Then a couple, 2 years later, Clark County looks at it and goes, wow, you know, we have all this infrastructure problem. NDOT, you know, it's not giving us as much federal monies. You know, we don't have enough money to take care of our roads, and, you know, our growth and development is, you know, we run Nevada, you know, we're 78% of Nevada's economy. By God, you know, we have infrastructure needs. They went to the legislature, and the legislature says, yeah, you can put it on the ballot. And they also at that point gave the opportunity to the local governments, to the 15 rural counties. So it was on the ballot for 15 rural counties and Clark County, okay? Churchill County, I was the lone voice. My beloved commissioner says, Alan, you know, we're Republican. I said, so am I. I don't believe in taxes either, but I believe in managing resources. I mean, the roads suck. I mean, you know, the cost of an alignment is going to be cheaper than what I'm going to pay extra in gas tax, okay? Alan, you go out, you go to the Kiwanis, the Rotary, the Lions Club, and, you know, go talk, or 2 or 3 are gathered in my name. Go ahead and talk about gas tax and why it would be important to do that, but we're not going to be there, and, you know, don't make any comments about the Board of County Commissioners. So every time I made that presentation, I said, these are my own personal viewpoints. I would rather invest in community infrastructure instead of having to buy new shocks and alignment, you know, every other year for my car. You know, getting alignments 3 times a year for my car, and the increased shocks. In the 15 counties, including Humboldt County, it went down. But had it been a state, and it passed in Clark County, had that been a statewide question, okay, it passed by enough in Clark County, it would have carried the rurals. In the same way, there's been some legislation, and you can pick your favorite questions on the ballots that have happened over the last 6, 8 years. Ballot questions pass by Clark County that we in the rurals don't like, okay? It's one dealing with guns, perhaps. You know, I don't know where you guys stand on marijuana, but obviously they were able to get that passed, and that impacted. But had that been a statewide ballot question, all of us would have had fuel indexing a little bit earlier in an effort to help us address those needs. And if one of our objectives is safe public transit, quality roads, you know, getting them bladed on a regular basis, these roads that folks drive on, in order for your team, you know, you have your equipment, you have your people, but in order for them to do it, you got to have the resources to support them, okay? So developing what your goals and your objectives are in that process, you know, helps understand. So then you have to set aside a priority. You know, what is a priority? You know, Dave and Gina hopefully think they understand what your priority is. I'm not sure how you guys go about in your budget process of documenting and ranking, you know, requests. But ultimately, they want to get an alignment with what your priorities are, what the community priorities are. So there's that dialogue in that program. So all of that comes up at what we call within the planning stages. And then in that evaluation, you know, how do we measure what the right results are? You know, going back to that roads, do we set a benchmark for the road department that on certain roads we want those bladed 3 times a year? You know, do we want them bladed 6 times a year? You know, that type of thing. You know, provide clear guidance to the departments on what the expectation is for their budgets. You know, make sure that they provide relevant information to senior management and to the board, you know, on what their needs are to meet the needs of the community, to meet the needs of what they need to do their job effectively at the department. And then obviously during the whole process, you adopt a budget. There are other ways you can do budget augmentations, you can do budget transfers, you can status check if something's not working, you know, you can, you know, change the course. But to have tangible and intangible criteria on what to include in the upcoming budget or in the 5-year plan, in the fiscal plan, is important. You know, it's important that the board share that. So obviously you develop, ultimately by statute, you got to develop a budget. Department heads yelling and screaming already. You didn't fund them enough.
Been here a few minutes.
You know, we got statutory guidelines. Chapter 354 of NRS talks about the budget guidelines, Local Government Budget Act. Okay. Gina's got her tentative estimates of revenue by the Department of Taxation on February 15th. She'll get the final estimates on March 15th. She'll get the pro forma property tax stuff. I think it's like March 25th or 28th or something, basically right at the end of March. Okay. You have these timelines. Tentative has to be filed by April 15th. The final budget has to be filed and approved by you guys by the end of May. That 3rd week in May, you guys will hold a public hearing. And you're going to talk about the changes between the tentative budget and the final budget. And that's a reconciliation where, whoops, pick on me when I was at Churchill County. Alan called, guessed wrong. You know, I funded something on the wish list that the board did, you know, a couple board members had a higher priority than others. This is, why did you include the swimming pool deck? Well, I included it because mathematically it was right there on the cusp. yes or no. I decided to go yes. The board ultimately said, no, we're not going to fund the deck. To this day, the deck and swimming pool hasn't been done. That would never get done at this point at that facility. But you have that reconciliation between tentative and what final budget, what ultimately happens, okay? And, you know, in Humboldt County, you guys have your own process, your own forms and stuff that they follow to make sure that they get the input of the departments, of the community, the oversight folks. And I talk about budget transfers and augmentation. So when we adopt the budget, when you guys adopt the budget, it's not the be all end all. You can make changes. But as you prepare the budget, there's always two questions that I always went to my commissioners with, okay, as a comptroller. What if I'm right? What if I'm wrong? What if I'm wrong? Okay. You know, what if I'm wrong? And what if my revenue projections, even though I was ultra conservative, if I'm wrong, we got to lay people off. That sucks. Because people we lay off are the people that go to our church, that coach our kids' baseball team, our softball team, those type of things. Never, never a good moment. So we've got to go through this process, especially if we're going to start adding things. You know, it's a lot easier to add capital than it is people. But a lot of times it does take people to do jobs. So two questions to bear in mind. What if I'm right? What if I'm wrong? So that's kind of a quick overview of the budget process. So before I jump into revenue projections, any questions, comments? Gina, you want to add anything? Okay, hey, get done in 4.5 hours at this rate. I got to get on that same road someone else has. So I'll go quick, but I want to make sure we're getting what you guys need. Revenue apportionment, okay? So when I think of budget, I think of three things, okay? I think of revenue. I think of liabilities, which is a balance sheet item. What are the liabilities? Your auditors talked about that today. That would be your PERS liability, your OPEB liability. You talked about not funding depreciation on your enterprise funds. That's a potential liability. Infrastructure deficit. If we're not taking care of the stuff that we have and we're politely ignoring it because of financial situation isn't so cool, okay? Those are things that could come back to haunt us. So in this revenue apportionment on your screen, you can see that green slice, that's property tax. So what I'm looking at is I'm looking at just your governmental funds, your governmental. I'm not looking at the enterprise funds, proprietary funds, just your governmental funds, property tax, biggest slice of the pie. That black wedge is a consolidated tax. So we're going to talk about consolidated tax. I'm going to go into detail of property tax as well. Then you got the intergovernmental revenues. And this past year, why that's so high is the intergovernmental revenues that you got through the CARES Act and COVID type of thing. That red slice, charges for services. Okay, you know, in a lot of governmental sectors on the governmental side, you know, the recorder's office, they charge for recording services, but it doesn't cover the cost of running the business. Our swimming pool in Fallon in Churchill County, we have a swimming pool. We lose $250,000 every year on the swimming pool. So why do we have the swimming pool? We ought to close the swimming pool down, right? We lose $250,000. Well, the reason we don't is we have 348 miles of canals. And about every other year, we lose one kid that drowns in the canal. So the Board of County Commissioners, and you know, but you look at it from a financial side, you know, we got a lost leader, let's don't do swimming pools. We got to teach our kids how to swim. We got to provide recreational opportunities for our kids. So you know what, we can't charge $8.95 to go swimming for 2 hours, okay? I mean, Wild Island or whatever in Reno, they can charge $30. People will pay that to go for one day, but here at right by your softball complex to go swimming, if you charge $10 a kid, people aren't going to go. Okay, so you use general resources, you use property taxes, sales tax, other things to support that. Some purists might say, "My God, why are you losing money on that?" Okay, so charges for services sometimes doesn't make it happen. You know, so there's other reasons why we have general support, and she talked about that in those one financial statements where you have operating revenue, capital grants, and then what are your general resources that supports your general fund. Okay, and the citizens, let's pick on you and your core constituents. They want parks, they want recreation, they want things that their kids can do. You know, they want positive things their kids can do, instead of investing in juvenile probation. Maybe if we invest in parks and golf and swim and little leagues and those type of, soccers and those type of things, that's an investment in our kids and energy and effort. Get them off their damn phones and get them having fun. They're not graffitiing. They're not stealing at the local Walmart. They're doing positive things because we made that a priority, an investment of revenue. I tell the story, and I don't know if Mayor Tedford ever hears it, but my daughter worked for the City of Fallon swimming pool. And when she worked at the City of Fallon swimming pool and at the gym, it was $1 to get in. $1 to get into the city swimming pool. And the county had their separate pool that we operated, and we're jerks. We made the kids actually pay, $1.50, I think is what it was. But if a kid couldn't pay $1 to get in, my daughter, as an employee of the City of Fallon, you know what she was instructed to ask them? Are you hungry? Do you want something from the snack bar? So not only did they get in for free, the idea of giving them a granola bar, giving them an apple because that kid may not eat. That was the mayor's way of saying, you know what? That kid needs to be in there. I want that kid to feel safe, get some nourishment, and swim. But from a financial, you look just pure financially, you go, man, what an idiot. But you know what? That's an investment, and that's looking at setting priorities, executing, and they lose. Ours is a year-round pool. I think they only lose like $90,000 a year doing their outdoor swimming pool. If you're just looking at money. And sometimes as bean counters, people get so focused in on looking at departments and those type of things that you sometimes miss the whole picture. So let's look at the revenue apportionment. Clearly charges for services. You can't charge enough in certain areas, and you don't want to. You don't want to. So let's look at property tax. Here's an example of a property tax apportionment, and that yellow piece of pie there is a school district. Between their operating rate and their debt service rate, they get the majority of the property tax. But what happens here at Humboldt County at the Treasurer's Office, they get the 100% of the complaints. Even though the school district might get 38, 40%, 50% of the revenue, everyone's going to complain. And then who do they complain to next after the Treasurer's Office? You right here, Board of County Commissioners, because you guys set the property tax rate. The public approves the voter-approved override tax rate if you have debt service at your school district, and the 75 cents is a statutory rate for school districts. The city of Winnemucca, the city council will approve their rate. But everyone typically jumps on the county and says, hey, you get blamed for, quote, high property taxes. Although you guys have one of the lower property taxes. So when we deal with property tax, we have tax caps and abatements. And what happened is based on the value of the price of the homes. So when we look at what's the property taxes, I'm going to pick on Gina for a minute. I can tell you what Gina's going to pay in property taxes next year. I'll tell you what she and Jim are going to pay the following year. They're going to pay 3% more than what they paid in the current year. It's their primary residence, okay? And unless they add an addition or add something that adds value to it, even though their home value may go up, make up a number 10%, with the housing and that doesn't affect the assessed value, okay? And that increase they have is limited or capped, okay? And it's capped on the greater than the twice the CPI or the 10-year average in assessed value. And in Winnemucca, Humboldt County, the 10-year average was 4.7. The change in CPI was 2.4. So the residential cap is 3, but the general cap for commercial enterprise is going to be the greater of the 2.4 or the 4.7. So if you have a business enterprise out, that's not your primary resident, let's say make up a number or an example, you own Boot Barn. You own that shopping center that has Boot Barn. The most your property taxes could go up is 4.7%. Okay. And that was for the current year that they went into this year, your tax year. Even if you guys had raised the rate, beyond that, all they would do is pay 4.7%. You guys go ahead and you approve a 10% increase in property taxes, Jim and Gina are only going to pay 3% more than what they paid last year. So if their current year property tax make up a number of $1,000, that 3% increase, she's going to pay $1,030. The following year, she's going to pay 3% higher than $1,030. Okay, so make up a number, it's going to be $1,062 or whatever that might be. So you have property tax rate management. The Nevada Taxpayers Association puts out a 12-page overview of the Nevada tax system, and your assessor's office has copy. Typically, they provide copies of that. So we look at the level of abatement for Humboldt County, and you guys are the second lowest in the state. Lander County is the lowest. Your abatement is only 2.51%. So what happened was when they set those tax caps, and SB 509 and AB 409, okay, what happened is they said your property tax can't go up more than 3% if it's your primary residence, or the alternate cap, which is capped at 8%, or 2 times CPI, the greater of 2 times CPI, or the 10-year average of assessed value, okay? But they never said what could happen on the downside. And the reason why you guys don't have much abatement during the housing crisis, your economy tends to operate separately or opposite of the teeter-totter because of mining. So mining was strong when the economy went in the tank, your housing values didn't drop. In Reno, housing value dropped, from 350,000 down to about 200,000 for homes in that area, or Lyon County. So you take Lyon County's abatement for residential properties, 33.81%. So those guys are, quote, getting the discount because when it dropped, because of economic obsolescence and foreclosures, and you could buy a house at the golf course in Fernley for $79,000. Now that same house is selling for $500,000. But the assessor ended up in Lyon County dropping that down to $79,000. We'll call it $80,000, and it can only go up 3%. It's going to take forever. That's good for the homeowner, bad for the local government. But what happened in Winnemucca and what happened in Battle Mountain, in Humboldt, Lander County, looking at the data from the Department of Taxation for the current year abatements, your abatement is 2.51. Lander County is 1.3. Okay, Churchill County is 7. Clark County is 23%. Carson's 15. So they get that abatement. So even if the housing market were to slide, because it's replacement cost new, less depreciation, is how they determine the property taxes. So property taxes is going to be stable. It's only going to go up slightly. So all Gina can do, the easiest way for her to identify property taxes, not talking about net proceeds of mines, but if she does anything greater than 3% over prior year actual, she's being a little too aggressive. So at that point, the question is, well, gosh, we got all this new construction. So new construction will be valued at the current price. Replacement cost new. Well, it's new. Okay. So if that house sold for $500,000, and let's say the land value is $100,000, $400,000 for improvements. Okay. That they're going to pay the entire amount. They're not going to be subject to abatement. Where somebody, let's pick on Gina, whose house might make up a number 15 years old. She has that depreciation in the fact that it may have went down a little bit during, the housing slump. Okay. So anything above 3%, I would argue she's being pretty aggressive. Okay. And this is where I tell people, truth with a big T or a little t. Don't lie to yourself. Okay. We can go ahead and make projections. We can be conservative, which is good, but let's disclose that. Let's make sure people know, this is where we're at. And what's funny is the Department of Taxation, you look at their estimates, and especially as it relates to sales tax. And because of my experience back in 93 and 94, we track tax. Since that time, I've tracked taxable sales every month, and we do recalculations and comparisons because Churchill County had a Saks Fifth Avenue. We had a Vaughn's grocery store. Okay. We had those businesses from Clark County that got reported on the Churchill County taxable sales line. We don't have a Saks Fifth Avenue. We do have a Fifth Avenue, but it's right by, Laura Mills Park. But those taxable sales got pushed. And then we had a geothermal plant back in 1989, one of the years of assessed value, they built a new plant for like $30 million. So that artificially inflated our taxable sales level, and that's our CTX got affected by that. So, it's important to look at the Department of Taxation's estimates with a level of, what if they're right, what if they're wrong? And then start doing a comparison. What was interesting is Department of Taxation, about the last 8 years of my career, they asked me for what my projections were before they put those into their projections. Because a lot of times what they were doing is one size fits all. And even Churchill and Humboldt County are two different counties. Your taxable sales here are so much higher than ours in Churchill County because we're 60 miles from Reno, we're 60 miles from Carson, okay? Population-wise, we're about the same. You guys beat us almost 2-to-1 in taxable sales because your folks shop at home. Because you can't it's not an hour to Reno, okay? Like it is in Churchill County. So again, rate calculation, the caps, I talked about that, the 3% over owner occupied. There you can see that yellow bar was, what the abatement amounts are for Humboldt County. So on property tax, you could raise the rate. You can raise the rate. What's going to happen, which is interesting, because Boulder City wanted to raise the question of, should we raise the rate so that the new construction would pay that additional amount and it would have no impact on the existing taxpayers? Because again, picking on Gina again, she's going to pay 3% more every year until it gets changed at the state level. Okay, you could raise the rate, and the apportionment would change. We did that in Churchill County. We raised the rate after we built our new senior center to provide them a 3-cent override property taxes that specifically went to the senior center. Okay, and I'm arguing that Churchill County, and of course, I'm on a bunch of their boards, but I don't have much influence, well, maybe a little influence, but they ought to look at raising the rate to support the youth club, the City of Fallon rate to support the youth club. Okay. And what that would do is that would lower the amount that goes to the general fund of the county, lower the amount that goes to the state of Nevada, lower the amount that goes to school district debt service. Because again, the total pie is only going to increase, okay, by 3% in the alternative cap, which would be the 4 points. What was that for Humboldt County? Your alternative cap was 4.2%. Okay, and it would reduce some of the others, some of the other areas, but the new construction would pay 100%. They would pay on their total value, new value. It's not a popular thing to do, and that's one of the things a million years ago, Bob Hatfield, when he was involved in NACO and in Douglas County, he set up GIDs to anticipate changes that were going to happen in the consolidated tax distribution, and he guessed right, and it created more revenue. But that's something to consider. What's interesting and where you guys would benefit from this is that the net proceeds of mines, they pay a $5 rate. If you were to raise the rate, what you're doing is you would get that rate less, they're still going to pay the 5. But what goes to the state of Nevada, make up a number, you increase by 3 cents, 3 pennies. Those 3 pennies are going to go to Humboldt County and not the state of Nevada on the net proceeds side. Something to consider. I'm not advocating it, but if you're looking for long-term stability in revenue resources, that might be something to consider, is to understand the revenue stream, understand how to do those things that may have a long-term implication that would benefit, because we want to meet the strategic goals of the community. Okay. And some goals might be counter to, you may have a goal that says, well, you want to be the lowest taxing entity in the great state of Nevada. Okay. But if you also want to be the safest community, okay, they may be in conflict, because it takes the sheriff's office, the volunteer firemen and those type of things. It takes money to run those. So let's jump into consolidated tax. There's 6 different taxes. 2 of them are sales tax related. The BCCRT, which is the basic city county relief tax, that's a 0.5% sales tax, and then you got supplemental city county relief, which is 1.75 cents. Okay, you guys have the lowest sales tax rate in the great state of Nevada. You and several other rural counties, you don't have any of the other optional taxes. So those are your two big ones. And then the other one is your government services tax. So when you go to DMV and get your license plate stickers, you're paying, that's GST. It used to be called motor vehicle privilege tax, but now it's government services tax. So when you go get your license plate, those tags, a portion of that goes into the consolidated tax, a portion goes to the schools, support school funding. Then you have what's called real property transfer tax, buying and selling a real estate, okay? So to look at Humboldt County, here's an allocation. Oh, that's also on your board. Okay. So that blue is your 1.75% of that's your sales tax. And then the black is the other piece. So you can see that those two elements are significant. So for the year just ending in your audit, what's called tier 1, is the county as a whole, which includes the city of Winnemucca and all the GIDs that share in the CTX. You guys had $16.5 million, and that was up $910,000 from the prior year in your consolidated tax. So you had a 5.8% increase. So let's look at the elements. I talked about that. Now, it's cigarette and liquor. Those are excise tax, okay, on per pack and per gallon, a gallon of liquor. And cigarette. And in Nevada, those took a hit because the tourism went down. So if you look at the first tier distribution of the last, from 2010 to 2021, you can see that you guys peaked in 2013, okay? And I'm sure that had, I don't track the cost of gold or the value of gold in exploration, but that probably was, the mines were going really strong. And actually that was towards the end of the Great Recession, or in the Great Recession, where you guys were running very strong, especially compared to the balance of the state. So following and looking at the consolidated tax is an important thing. With that, obviously, is taxable sales, So you go to a boot barn, you buy a pair of jeans and a nice Western shirt. Maybe I did that. Actually, I did. Spent $100,
Thank you.
You're welcome. They're building a boot barn or moving into the old Rayleigh's in Churchill in Fallon, so I shop at home. But hey, when you come from the hospital, you didn't have clothes. Anyway, so I pay $100 out here. The sales tax is 6.85. Okay, 6.85%. So I had to give them $106.85. And of that, $2% of the sales tax goes to the state. $2.60 goes to support schools. That goes to the state and it comes back, and that's called local school support tax. So that goes to the state, goes into the distributive fund back to the different school districts. Then you have the 50 cent, the 0.5, which is basic city county relief, and the 1.75, which comes back to the counties, and it goes to the county of origin except on the SCCRT and BCRT. So different places in the state have different property tax rates. As you can see there, got a picture of the state of Nevada. Humboldt County is 6.85. Also, Esmeralda and Mineral are the ones that are 6.85. Those are the minimum allowed. The highest tax rate is our friends in Clark County at 8.375. 8.375. So a million years ago, before I worked in local government, I worked for Deloitte & Touche and worked on the audit of Independence Mining out in Elko, and they had the low sales tax, the same that you guys had back in the day. And there was a financial incentive for their accounts payable folks to make sure they use the Elko rate versus the Washoe rate because there was a significant difference, and to make sure that it was properly applied. And clearly, as a matter of fact, I believe one of your auto dealerships, talks about the lower tax rate, and use that as a marketing tool, for increasing the amount of sales tax that is generated locally. Even though, people pay less, they buy those high ticket items. It financially benefits the local community. In the same way that, your residents, the more they shop at home, the better off they are. And during the pandemic, we saw the rural taxable sales do significantly better. Why? Amazon.com, ordering over the internet and you put your zip code in for shipping, they would apply the local tax rate and you were getting collections on that. So we saw increases. So what drives the economy, right? For you guys, mining and exploration is huge. Okay. You guys have housing, recreational tourism. I'm not going to lie. In the summer playing softball in tournaments, paying $175 a night for a hotel in Winnemucca during a big softball tournament, girls softball tournament. You're like, wow, I could probably get not quite the penthouse at the Peppermill in Reno for less, but during your rodeos, I mean, hey, it's supply and demand. Fallon does the same thing, during our big events. You guys just had more big events, and with your mining and stuff, when that's going well, your local economy does well. When your local economy does well, your tax revenues that come in, as well. So then the question ultimately comes is quality of life, balance of life. As one of our commissioners at Churchill said, we don't want consumption junction. We don't want Lowe's, Home Depot, Sam's Club and Costco all on the same corner, right off of Winnemucca Boulevard, or in our case, off Williams Avenue. Okay, that's not what we're trying to get for Churchill. It may not be what you folks, are looking for here. You want to maintain the rural lifestyle that Humboldt County has to offer. So you got to weigh those things out as, you guys make your decisions. And, earlier today, you approved some zone changes for what I gather was some economic development that may take place on some interchanges. Okay, which is interesting because when I track taxable or gas sales, you guys kick butt in Humboldt County. The reason you kick butt on gas taxes, you're on Interstate 80 about halfway. And every time when we drive through, we always get gas at the Maverick and, on second exit, go gas up type of thing. So, there are some economic advantages of being on major, on major interstates that helps because of those gallonage out of, the highway, people jumping off the highway, filling up gas, that helps on the excise tax of, maintaining your roads and your infrastructure. So understanding how some of those things are all interrelated is important. So you take consolidated tax and you take your property tax, and I'm going to jump quickly to, and your auditor really downplayed it, but you know what? Gina does a great job putting your management discussion and analysis in your audit. And in here, she's going to say, she didn't send this to me, but I know it's there. A certain percentage of your total governmental revenues are those activities coming from that program. And now I'm going to say they're 20+% and for each one. So sales tax and property tax is a huge element of your revenues. Other revenues that you guys have, your operating grants and leases, franchise fees, charges for services, your other intergovernmental revenues, okay? Fines and forfeitures. Obviously, I didn't have to pay a fine today because I wasn't flying down the interstate. But yeah, I've donated before. Voluntary tax, the investment income. Right now, the investment income's tough, although the interest rates are moving slightly up. But those are other revenue resources that you got to anticipate, calculate, and look at, because that enters into the total equation of how much money is going to be available into the budgetary process. Your business proprietary funds, Humboldt TV, Solid Waste Management, McDermott Sewer, Star City Water. What I say on those and what I heard talked about, Andre talked about it is looking at your rates, and we're losing money. And she says, well, on a cash flow basis, because we don't write a check out. Gina doesn't write a check to depreciation. It's a non-cash item. So we lost, one of them, she said, I think it was $28,000 if I heard it right as I was driving. You lost $28,000 in that enterprise fund, but depreciation was like, I think she said 30-something thousand. So on a cash flow basis, you didn't lose money. But the problem is at some point in time, that system gets older and you're going to have to do an upgrade. You're going to have to replace a line. You're going to have to buy, more filters or whatever it may be. So doing rate setting, and that's a difficult thing. How are our rates? How do our rates compare to our other rates? I tell an example, as I said, on the Committee on Local Government Finance, it was a governmental entity and that went to NDEP to get a sewer loan, okay? And they went to the sewer loan, and part of that through Question One and Michelle Stamatis and that group, they did a grant and a loan forgiveness, but they looked at what's your average rate. And this entity's average sewer rate at that time was $6.60. $6.60. They hadn't raised it 29 years. No, 26 years. They hadn't raised it in 26 years. $6.60. Statewide average, and this was probably 7 years ago, was $29. They were forced to raise it to the statewide average. Constituents went ape because it went from $6, and I'm on fixed income. You guys heard? You guys hear it? You know it, right? The good news is, in that community, it lasted for 5 days, 2 weeks, and it blew over. And you know, what are you going to do if you can't flush your toilet? Your house is worthless, right? So the people had to pay it. But the better question that I have as a finance person, this is, well, gosh, what if we would have stably raised the rates over that 26 years, 10 cents, 10 cents or 20 cents, and go from 660 and slowly and been at $22.50, and then have to move it from $22.50 to 28 or whatever that magic number was, $29, whatever that magic number was, because they were pleased and bragged about never raised the rate in that enterprise fund. But you know where they made it? They made it up on the electrical fund. The electrical fund subsidized the sewer fund. Okay. What I thought I heard is that your solid waste fund makes money and it subsidizes. So in the aggregate, if you're looking at all of them in that total column, you look good, but these other entities may not be paying their fair share. And it's not popular to raise rates. It sucks, right? People get unelected for that. I was in Boulder City, and this was a point that staff had told me to make an emphasis about rate setting and doing a fair rate. One of the city councilwomen says, you know what, last year we lowered the rate. And they just completed a study, and the study says obviously the rates are well under, and they're subsidizing the rates from the general fund. They know that. Staff knows that. They're doing it internally. They're lying to themselves. They're not doing a proprietary fund, as your auditor said. Those should be self-sufficient. The users pay the money in. It should be self-balancing. They're getting subsidized. Okay? Not good. Okay? Set the rate fairly. And that's what one ought to do. And she says, well, we can't do that. We won't get elected. And I says, you know what? I says, ma'am, you don't put enough confidence in yourself. The reason people voted for you is you're going to do the right thing. You're going to do the right thing for the long term. Okay? And if your rates are too low and down the road you don't have enough money when it comes time to make that major capital improvement, then you're going to have to raise the rate even bigger. Then you're going to end up issuing bonds, and you're going to issue bonds over 30 years where you should have been saving money over that 30 years when the thing was new through depreciation, because it's getting depreciated over that period of time. Have money in an extraordinary repairs and maintenance fund that provides that stability so that you have the money that you need to fix the system. So the residents, the services that they get, the toilet flushes, the water service, the water meets clean water standards, right? You go to the dump and you're able to, dump, and, it's following NDEP standards and, post-closure and all that good stuff. They're charging an adequate rate. It's not too high, not too low, just right. Yeah, Goldilocks, right? You don't want your rates too low. You don't want them too high. They need to be just right. Have a study done, an engineering study, whatever the rate, firms that come out and do that, so that you're not lying to yourself and you're not subsidizing it. Speaking of subsidy, I was the subject of 2 editorials in the Las Vegas Review Journal during my career. And the second one, which I'm going to tell you that story, was funnier than the first one. But I was put on record that in Churchill County, Board of County Commissioners, we subsidize the brothel industry. Subsidize the brothel industry. Newspaper came to me and they were doing an expose and stuff, and they wanted to. So we looked at the revenue that we charged, okay? And then I got with our sheriff's department and the number of calls for services. And chairman of the board, Jim Regan, county commission, was opposed to the brothels. We wanted the damn thing shut down, and it did add value to our community per se, okay? And so the lady, and I said, you know what? My cost analysis from a public safety standpoint, it cost us $72,000 in law enforcement services, and I'm making up numbers. These are not real numbers, kind of close, I think, though. And we made like $38,000 in revenues. So if revenues are 38 and you're spending 70, that difference is being subsidized by somebody, right? And in this case, and the community is like, what the heck? What do you mean we're subsidized? And so obviously at that point, the board was chided into raising the brothel rates, the licensing fees. They held a public hearing. The head of the brothel association statewide said, you can't do that. If you do that, the brothels industry is going to die, and they're not going to be financially viable. Board of County Commissioners, so that's a business decision for them to decide. But I don't think the average taxpayer should be subsidizing an industry. Okay. So ultimately, over a period of time, the thing burned down, and a new one's never been built. And since that time, the rates have been adjusted to reflect what Lyon County charges in their rates, which were significantly higher. I tell that story as it's a bad crossover, but the real thought is that when you have enterprise funds, as your auditors, Andrea said, is they should pay for their own fees. Okay, and if they're being quote subsidized by another enterprise, that enterprise operations, are they the same constituents? You know, is it still the McDermott people that are paying it? If it is, then why don't you just true up the rates that are balance the rates to get them both right? Because they're, you know, one's overpaying for the other. And if both people are subscribing to the same service, the total cost may not be different. But long-term capital planning, setting long-term rates to meet those costs and being as efficient as you can on the expenditure side is going to create stability for your enterprise operations. So there you go. That's revenue. Questions? Yes, please.
I think it was, you were talking about property taxes. If we raise property taxes.
Ron, could you bring your mic?
If we were to raise property taxes, that raise would come to us and less would go to the state.
On a proportionate basis. So what would happen is that because of the tax cap, the tax cap is going to be limited to 3% growth or the alternative cap. So what's going to happen is just give you a way of example, and I'm going to use Churchill County numbers because I'm more familiar with them, although those have changed. But let's say that 1 penny of property tax rate was $45,000. Okay. So then what happens is you raise the rate. We raised it 3 cents. Okay. So that 3 cents, it actually made it like 38,000 per penny. Okay. Because each penny that went, because it was $2.83. Okay. That balanced out because the total amount that was being collected was going to still be that total, you know what I may have used in assessed value. Well, it doesn't matter. So the total amount's not going to increase more than what the cap allows.
Right.
But the amount, so if you apportioned a portion to like your indigent accident, that 1.5 cents, okay, that amount, instead of being 45 cents per penny multiplied by 1.5, it's going to be like, hypothetically, let's say 38,000 times 1.5. The 17 cents that goes to the state of Nevada, okay, instead of them getting 17 $45,000 pennies, if you will, they're going to get 17 $38,000 pennies. So each penny went down in value by $7,000. Okay, and that 3 cents that you increased, that new program is going to get 3 pennies of rate that equal 38,000. Does that make sense?
No.
Do we have a flip chart?
I think I have a little more, I need a little more time to digest it here.
And the other thing he mentioned too is net proceeds is taxed at $5. And so let's say, for example, Twin Creeks Mine is in the Golconda Fire District, so that tax rate out there is 2.12. So the difference between the $5 and the 2.12 goes to the state. So the state's actually making more money on net proceeds than Humboldt County.
But in the reality, the taxpayer still pays more because you raise the tax.
But they're
But-
capped at 3%.
But they're
Or-
capped. So what I'm going to do, Mr. Chair, if I can, is I'm going to develop an example and
Okay.
email it to Gina.
Okay.
And she can forward it to you guys that would show that apportionment. And what's going to happen though, so that, and I don't know how, and I don't know how you apportion your county rate. Does it all go to the general fund, or do you send it to a lot of different places? So those other places that you send it to, do you have like a park and rec fund or no? Or what? So does Public Works get property tax? No, of course ours doesn't either. So what gets property tax besides general fund?
6 judicial districts.
So the 6th judicial district, they're going to get less in property tax. So let's say that you're going to give it to the senior center. Okay. So they're going to get less. In my hypothetical example at 38, so that they used to get 45,000 for every penny. Now they're only going to get 38,000. Okay. And let's say that they had 10 pennies. Okay. So they were getting 450,000 property tax. Now they're going to get 380. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
They're only going to get 380. So they're going to lose $70,000. But of that 70,000 that they're losing, that you add that, let's say that 10 cent, that's going to your senior center or your, Boys and Girls Club, youth library, whatever. Okay. And the same, but the state's their proportion share is also going to go down. Okay. So it's going to create more benefit to who's going to complain? City of Winnemucca. School districts not, because they're going to be held harmless in this school formula deal. Gaming tax will make up the difference. Net proceeds of mines, those people aren't going to complain. If Golconda Fire, I'm just making up language. Do they have a rate for Golconda Fire? Yeah. So their pennies that they were collecting, okay, they're going to be worth less value, right? So they're going to hurt. Well, I shouldn't say hurt, but they're going to see a reduced revenue. But the total taxpayer, you're still going to pay $1,030 hypothetically, or 103% of what your bill was last year, even though you raised property tax, make up a number. Let's say that raise that you did raise property tax by 5%, so it would have been 105, but you're still only going to pay 103. And your business, Boot Barn, that industrial complex there, that retail strip mall, whoever owns that, they're going to pay 104.7, not 105, with that new rate. So other people would, and when we did it at the city, or we did it at Churchill County, the city of Fallon got caught flat-footed and had to smooth things over a little bit because they got, and going using that hypothetical example, instead of getting 450, they only got 380,000. And they didn't realize that, but they supported the 3 cents for the senior center. So they quietly said, oh, that was an unintended consequence. I said, well, I knew the math. I didn't know what the exact number was ultimately going to be, but I knew that you were going to get less. And the state of Nevada also got less, but they don't care because what they get out of Humboldt County or Churchill County is insignificant compared to what they get out of Clark County and Washoe County. And I'm not advocating. I mean, you can run that scenario. Okay. Is that what you want to do? It may or may not be. But if you want to target revenue for a specific project and set them up for long-term success, okay, or put it, or if you went to the voters and said, do you want to approve a tax rate? So what they could have also done at Churchill is go to the taxpayer and said, do you want to do a 3 cent tax override to support senior center as an advice, as a question. So they did that. They did that for several years, and the voters approved it. Yeah. And then when the economy crashed, the voters said, no, they don't want to support the senior center. So it went in defeat. So we lost that tax rate. And exactly what happened is, what they said, well, the county's going to make up for it. The city and the county are going to make up for it. You're right, because you guys believe, you're no different than, in Churchill, you're going to take care of your seniors. You're going to take care of seniors, you're going to take care of the youth, and us able-bodied young folks, working class is going to pay for both ends of the spectrum, right? So the county and the city ended up supporting that difference until we came up and said, I said, hey, let's raise the rate and get them a specific rate to support the senior center. We are looking at trying to convince them, and the city is actually trying to get me to help advocate possibly to do that to support the youth club. Found youth clubs like Boys and Girl Club. You guys have one. I don't know if they get a tax rate or if it's a separate. No. Yeah. So in our community, that's the city of Fallon runs the youth club. And the costs associated with running that. They're trying to identify, they got grants and stuff, but if they could have something, just like the senior center has grants and stuff, but if you get a stable revenue source, and property tax tends to be stable, that's a potential option. Another option is apportioning part of your consolidated tax. If you direct senior management and say, hey, we want $100,000 or $200,000 or what you pick the number to go support this program, let's say the youth club or the senior center, and do it out of consolidated tax as a specified revenue resource that we're going to portion that directly to support that program. They can do that, but now they got to take it from somewhere else in the, another piece of, within the budget from somewhere else. But I'll run that analysis. And I'll even work with the folks at Department, Kelly Langley at Department of Taxation, to have them see. Good news, bad news.
I'm not advocating raising taxes. I just am trying to understand how.
Conceptually, so this is what you ought to do. And by the way, I think it's too late because you had to notify the Department of Taxation by yesterday. Yeah. So it's too late, but it's not a bad mental exercise to have staff go through and say, okay, if we did this, what if? And what would that look like? And look at that more long-term, because there's going to be winners and losers, but whatever that new, if you designate that new revenue to go to X to provide them stability, they're the winner. The other folks are going to be losers. But some of those other losers are going to be people or entities that are outside of Humboldt County that, yeah, that's about kind of indirectly. And then on net proceeds, the benefit that you would get from net proceeds would be, and looking at your net proceeds values, and this is last year, on the 22 roll was 876 million, and it was $1 billion, so it went down. Your net proceeds, your net proceeds number is a big number. So an exercise to consider. I'm not advocating it because I'm as Republican. Well, I shouldn't say that, but yeah. I'm a rural Nevada guy, so I think and I'm a finance guy, so you know where I come from, and most rural entities tend to be fiscally conservative. So. Absolutely. We're going to actually talk about that under that circle that says financial planning. Okay. But your library fund is actually what we call a special revenue fund. Your enterprise funds are going to be those that are business-like. And that's going to be, what was it, the McDermott, the TV, and the solid waste. Those. Star City. Yep. Those. But that's exactly what you want to do, is set up those extraordinary repairs and maintenance fund, capital projects fund. And the neat part about those is that they're not subject to collective bargaining. You can build up those reserves, and the union can't go after that and use that as saying, I demand that for wages. But if you develop a wage policy, just like your rate policy, is you don't want your wages too low, you don't want them too high, you want them just right, the Goldilocks theory, then if you have a mathematical calculation, then you wouldn't be fighting, you shouldn't have a fight with the unions per se. Because, and, that's what we did. This is an aside. We'll get in, on investment services, we talked about labor costs, because labor costs is a huge element. But what I did in Churchill County, and it worked very effectively, is we did class 3 counties, of which Humboldt County was one of the comparisons. Humboldt, Elko, Lyon, Churchill, Nye, Carson, and those were comparables, and we did what we call class 3 average. Okay, and then we wanted to tie ourselves to that average. And then our employees argue, well, what do you mean we're just average? We're above average. We're the best law enforcement. We're the best sheriffs. People in town. Says, absolutely, sure you are. Humboldt County has the best too. So does Nye County. So does Elko County. And if you dial into that average, and we were able in Churchill County, because the city of Fallon did a wage study many years ago, and they did this where they put certain value. Public safety was their highest value, so they paid those guys even more than Metro at that time were being paid. That we were able to exclude them from our mathematical calculation, and the mediator agreed with us that it wasn't comparable. But ultimately, we want to pay our people the right amount, for their talent. Again, we don't want them to be underpaid. We don't want them to be overpaid. The just right concept. So let's jump into making investments, investments of this public funds, otherwise known as the expenditures. So where do we spend our money? You can see that one blue bar there is public safety, $27.88 of every $100 that's spent on a functional basis. Public safety is $27.88. Public works is that purple $11 straight up. General government is $20.04. You can see your proprietary funds, $4.49. Okay, so let's jump into the general fund. Okay, here's an functional allocation. Pretty good diversity there of how the money's spent. We jump into the allocation. You can see that the largest is public safety. Not uncommon, right? We need a community that everyone feels safe. So public safety includes, the sheriff's office, probation, or no, actually probation's in judicial, fire department, emergency management, LEPC, general government, 31.5%. So of your total expenditures in the general fund, that 21.7 million, that's how it's allocated. What's interesting, if we look at the salaries and wages and benefits, okay? So what I've done here is it shows that first number in the general fund. General government's 31%, 31.5% of the total expenditures. Wages comprise 61.2% of that 31%. Okay. Public safety, look at that. Their wages is 86%. Judicial is 88.8%. So you give them, what their budget of $100 of budget, they're spending $88.80 for human resource costs, wages, employee benefits. Okay. But if you look overall, you're at 64.5 in the general fund, 64.5. So the question is, how does that compare? I'll tell you, at Churchill County, we wanted our number to be between 65 and 70. And you guys beat that. You guys are under that. So I'm arguing just from an analytics standpoint. And actually, I did go back 2 years. Yeah, you guys are 65.6 and 64.5. So the year before, you were actually 65.6. So yeah, you're within a relevant range. So my belief is, looking at this, is that your people are Goldilocks. They're paid just right. From you're allocating of your dollars. It does not appear that you're well different. Now, if you're a school district, that number, it tends to be from 80 to 90% is wage cost. Okay, so comparing counties to school districts is different. Comparing cities to counties are different ratios. But those are some of the ratios and stuff that Dave and Gina look at, as they manage, because they need to make sure that they're adequately staffed and that the matrix are there, because you want sustainability. Okay, we want sustainability because we don't want to have to raise taxes. We want taxes to be stable as well, right? Revenue resources. So we look at the programs and the service delivery. How can we be more efficient as local government? How can we do more with less? Are there strategic partnerships? Are there things that make sense working with the, with a cooperative group, whether it might be with the city of Winnemucca or a tri-county agreement where you're working with multiple counties to provide certain, solving certain problems, those type of things. So monitoring programs. And then again, asking the question, what if? What if we're right? What if we're wrong? What if something happens? Good things can happen as well as bad things. What if gold goes to $3,000 an ounce? What impact does that have on Humboldt County and revenue resources? One would think that would have a positive impact. What if gold went down to $300 an ounce? What impact would that have? Okay, anticipation. So we look at our business type activities, and again, you have your enterprise funds, and on those, again, main thing is make them cover themselves. You guys have a capital projects fund, okay? And in your capital projects fund, your ending fund balance is $4.2 million. But I looked up, your governmental assets are $55 million. Your business type assets are $7 million. That's that depreciated cost. So that, you have $62 million of assets with a repair and maintenance budget of only $4.2 million bucks. For, that's, I go out and I buy a new car. I don't have money in the bank to buy new tires when the tires need to be, to do oil changes, to replace the belts and hoses, the life cycle cost of owning a new car. If I don't have an equipment replacement program at the sheriff's office on replacing my squad cars and how I cycle those to maximize the efficiency of those, or my road department equipment, if I don't have capital replacement plan, how am I going to effectively keep those guys in business with the tools to do? So the question becomes, with capital projects, and Commissioner Tipton brought it up, do we have enough? Can we set money aside? Absolutely. And there's a fund that you guys don't have set up that you could set up. I don't believe you have. It's called Extraordinary Repairs and Maintenance. And I'll show you that on that last element of where you could set those up. That there's a specified NRS that allows for the establishment, and those are for capital assets greater than 5 years. Okay, we know that we're gonna have to replace this carpet in 15 years. The HVAC system in this building is probably only good for 20 years. Okay, the heat and air condition. So here's what you have available. Okay, but if you were to look at your capital improvement plan and the capital needs, okay, we're gonna have to replace the roofs. We're gonna have, and as we grow and expand, we're gonna probably need new facilities. Okay, do we have enough money in these capital projects funds? And if we get greater than anticipated revenues, that might be an area where we want to, we get that windfall. Go hypothetically, gold goes to $3,000 an ounce, and things come up, revenue, net proceeds is up. Those are areas that you'd want to start allocating money into those funds for capital improvements.
Alan, can I question, what should that ratio be in terms of, you mentioned we have 72 million in assets in our capital projects, is in at 4.2. What's a good ratio to have?
So that's an amazing question. There's 15% is what Boulder City's trying to get. And they said to me, do you think that's enough? I go, holy smokes. That's a lot of money. That'd be a great goal. Could you realistically get there? No, the other side of it is just like in our own accounts, right? If we save and invest 10% of our income, that should be able to get us through retirement and that type of thing. In the same way that, we'd have a safety net that we needed to replace the roof, the refrigerator goes out in our house, So then the question is 10%, if you had a balance of 10%, what would that look like? That'd look like 6.2 million. That might be more attainable than to slowly get there. Okay. Those things aren't going to happen overnight, but at the same time, if in Churchill County, we knew that we had to build a new jail. We built it and moved in 2017, and it cost us, $18 million. That was something that we planned, and we did borrow. We had some cash that we paid as a down payment, and then we financed the rest. But having, you know, having a 10%, that'd be awesome. You're not going to get there overnight. So unfunded liabilities, you have compensated absences, okay? You have your PERS pension liability that you had talked about in the audit presentation, your other post-employment benefits, OPEB liabilities, that's your retiree health insurance and stuff like that. You guys, there's two ways you can do it, pay as you go, or you could pre-fund, and many entities do pay as you go, and that's where you guys are at, you know, versus trying to do pre-funding. Your compensated absence, based on the notes in your financials, it's 1.1 million. You have zero set aside. And that 1.1 million says, okay, if everyone were to quit as of June 30th, we had to pay out their sick leave and their annual leave, what would it be? And look at the notes under
We
that.
actually have a compensated absence.
Oh, you do? Oh. So what's in that fund? Go find that page real quick. So hopefully, in an ideal world, what would be awesome, and what I was able to do is I was able to get it to equal, and actually 1 year we exceeded what our balance was in compensated absence. So if you had, you know, you have a liability of 1.1 and what's your fund balance? 300,000, $500,000? She's finding it.
I haven't done this year's transfer yet, so.
So your OPEB, your OPEB is 3.5, but that number is going down every year because there was a window of opportunity of employees who retired between that window that you are providing a payment to PEB, the state health insurance on behalf of them based on their years of service. And your PERS liability, you're not going to have to stroke a check for $25.5 million of PERS, okay? Even though it has to show up on the liability by the accounting gods and the award and how that works, you're not going to do that. PERS is 77% funded, because PERS at June 30th is going to continue to exist. They're going to continue to get investments, income, and people continue to pay into that. So those are your future liabilities. So that's the investment section. Questions on any of that on the expenditure side?
Alan?
Yes?
Can you speak about collective bargaining and capital projects? Are those funds subject to collective bargaining?
Capital projects funds are not subject to collective bargaining or 288. What's that?
I want to make more aware of that.
Yeah.
They're
So-
not subject, but they have to be spent within a certain number of years.
No, as long as you have a plan. So you have a plan in place. So here we go. So the toolbox allows under financial planning, let's just jump right to it. So NRS 354-6105, it talks about extraordinary repairs and maintenance. And that's the one that I would suggest you set up first, because de facto you do have a capital projects fund. The one we talked about, that is that 4.2 million. Okay. But I bet you that you guys have projects that would far exceed the 4.2 million. And some of those you would want to incur debt. And the reason why you want to incur debt, so for example, we built the jail, and juvenile detention center, although that one in Churchill, we didn't borrow money. On the jail, we borrowed money. We're going to pay that over, I think it's 20 years, even though that building probably has a useful life of 50 years. But if we did 100% pay as you go, the taxpayers, let's say it took us 5 years to collect the money to do pay as you go and then build it with no debt. During that 5-year window, those are the taxpayers that paid for that building, the capital cost. Although they're going to have economic benefit for 50 years. And those taxpayers for the next 50 years, in the classical argument, academic argument, those people should be paying part of the capital cost. Obviously they're paying the operating cost every year to, operate, let's say, that facility, that jail, okay? But if you do pay as you go, then you don't have the matching principle of those who pay the tax that goes to get the economic benefit. So that's one of the arguments. And debt's not a bad thing. If you get effective debt, at a good rate, although rates are going up, there are some entities that were getting 20-year money for like 1.9% interest, under 2%. And right now with inflation the way it is, they're genius, right? Because inflation is, depending on which numbers you look at, I mean, it's, was a number the other day that was touted on Wall Street. It was over 10%. And then construction cost, you guys, you talked about earlier in today's meeting, and I know that seemed like a week ago, but, the amount of capital the construction going on and trying to get a contractor to do something, and the cost is going up, and the builders can darn near charge whatever they want. Okay. But so borrowing money, financing a long-term capital asset is not necessarily a bad thing. So the rainy day fund or the stabilization of operations, you can use that for revenue shortfall, for natural disasters. You can only have up to 10% of your general fund expenditures. There's certain GASB 54 restrictions in order that you have to call that a special revenue fund. Okay. But again, that one's not subject to collective bargaining. The extraordinary repairs and maintenance. So those are expenses that ordinarily wouldn't occur more than once every 5 years. So what we did in Churchill in this is the HVACs, the carpets, the parking lots, the sidewalks. We've even did some major equipment that wasn't, because our road department has an equipment replacement plan and the sheriff has an internal one for his vehicles. But we set money aside for equipment replacement within our extraordinary repairs and maintenance. Okay. And by statute, it's reasonable and necessary. And then if you set a policy of X% outside of your capital projects fund, let's say you want to do 5% of your total capital assets value, 5% of the 60 whatever million that was, up to 3 million set aside. So that when, oh crap happens, we got a leak in the roof and we have to go, put a $200,000 fix on the roof, you have the money to do that. That money has been set aside. Again, an effective use in the extraordinary repairs and maintenance. Capital projects, you guys have that fund. You're required by statutes to have a capital improvement plan, submit that in July. Gina does that. But the whole purpose of that capital improvement fund is to say, this is what we're accumulating the money for. In the same way on your utility funds, if you're going to raise rates, because we know that, let's say we have a planned replacement of we have to replace a sewer line or whatever, or, those type of things. We're accumulating the money because we know, in fact, those items will need to be spent at some point in time. So those are funds that are allowed to happen, not subject to collective bargaining, those three. And you guys are Hall of Fame. You got 2 out of 3. You got stabilization, capital projects, but look at the extraordinary repairs and maintenance. So the next, talk about setting benchmarks or targets, and I'm old school, okay? Although now I got Sirius radio on my car. But 93.9 FM, I tell my Board of County Commissioners when I was at Churchill, I budget my revenues at 93.9, okay? I expect 100. Truthfully, I really want revenue to be about 104, but I'm only going to budget 93.9 or 94%, okay? I budget my expenses at 102.9, higher than what I expect to pay. One of the ways in which we do that is on wages. We say we have 26 and a half pay periods. Okay, well, there's only 26 pay periods on a biweekly basis, 52 weeks in a year. 52 divided by 2 is 26. And gee, Alan, how come you do 26 and a half? Well, because I don't want to have a statute violation, what I call no 2 violation that I overexpend my budget. Sounds like you guys had one on E911, okay? Probably bought some equipment in your 911 enhancement system and failed to augment the budget probably. But anyway, so we do 26 and a half because we want to, and we know we're not going to do that extra pay period. We're only going to have 26, but we budget more, okay, in case some unforeseen thing happens. We have a fund balance policy. You want to have a fund balance policy. Statute allows now up to easily 16.67%, not subject to collective bargaining. you guys could adopt a policy higher than that. They want to consider doing that. Your general fund, I didn't compute it. Maybe I did in this analytics. No, I didn't. But I have a feeling that historically your ending fund balance has been strong, and you've, through your financial leadership of your folks. But then people say, well, wait a minute. Okay. So, Gina, you're showing in the budget, we're going to lose $3 million in the general fund. My God, we can't lose $3 million. We better lay people off. Okay. And Dave shared with me some analysis, the senior management, they know historically that the revenues are going to, they may have budgeted, and these are my numbers, not Gina's numbers. This is my philosophy, not hers. Well, we were both kind of mentored by Uncle Bruce, Bruce Brooks, when me with the city of Reno, her when, was here in Winnemucca, at Humboldt County, Bruce, super good guy, super smart guy, a good financial leadership guy. We know revenues should come in greater than expected. And our expenses, we're not going to spend. We wanted our general fund people to come in at 94% of actual, of budget. We wanted them to come in 94, and they bragged about that. Oh yeah, we came in at 94. And I go, well, yeah, but you know what? We budgeted 2.5% or 3% higher. So don't get carpal tunnel patting yourself on the back, because we knew your budget was a little high to begin with, okay? Because we budgeted a little bit higher. You came in lower, that's great, okay? And, there's some departments, old school, would be, well, I got to spend 100% of what Gina and Dave give me. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to get, next year. That, if I only spend 89%, then they're going to only give me 89, not 100 next year. Or 103, okay? We got to convince those folks that the board's going to do the right thing. Management's going to do the right thing. So if something comes up, and by God, you got to buy a new widget that costs $100,000, that's why we have things in place. We can do a budget augmentation because we have a greater than anticipated opening fund balance than what we submitted to the Department of Taxation on our budget. We'll take this $100,000 widget to the board. County commissioners, they approve it. You can buy the $100,000 widget that you need for your department. Okay? Because management is on board with the department heads, and hopefully they're in sync with the Board of County Commissioners, that we have a financial plan in place so we can adjust for what ifs. What if we're wrong? What if we're right? Okay? There's going to be enough cushion to allow that flexibility. If Gina dials in exactly where she anticipates revenues to be, okay, and she could probably go 3 to 4 years hitting that target, that bullseye really close versus the bigger target. She could dial into that red zone, okay? But when COVID hit, okay, or if something in mining hit unexpected, or some black swan event happens, okay, now all of a sudden, oh crap, we didn't have a contingency in place. And if our reserves aren't where they need to be, then we're going to have to take quick, swift, direct action that could be more painful to the community and a disruption of services to the constituents. And I would argue you don't want that. You want to have a little bit greater flexibility, by being a little bit more financially conservative in having the fund balance and such, okay, to support the direction. And again, it's about cash flow, reasonable expectations, both by the residents, by the department heads and the elected officials, and by the employees, to do what's right, to do the best you can, and to make sure this is the best community that everybody puts, because we want Humboldt County to be the best, and that's good financial planning. What you don't want to do is you don't want to kill the golden goose. And I would argue that in Humboldt County, the golden goose is probably mining. That's a big revenue. In Churchill County, we had our enterprise funds of the telephone company. We had geothermal rents and royalties, which is which is good. Okay, we want to support those industries that support our community. And every once in a while, Gina may have to pull a rabbit out of the hat. That $100,000 widget says, "Yeah, Dave, I have that money." you know, or Dave comes in because, you know, the board says we got to spend $100,000, you know, because now our 911 system isn't compliant or whatever. When interoperability, we need to do this right now because of, you know, switching to 5G or 10G or whatever, you know. She can pull that rabbit out of the hat. There's that flexibility. But if she gets too fancy and gets too cute and tried to get everything dialed in accurate, and if something unexpected happens, she may not have that flexibility. So that's one of the things, you know, and you look at it and you go, oh my gosh, she's projecting we're going to lose this revenue, you know, this amount of money. Our balance is going to be done. Okay. They have a track record. They know where they're at. And, you know, as a coach always told my daughter in softball and recruitment, so you got to trust the process. Okay. And I believe the process that I set up, that I was taught to me, has worked effectively. And during that economic downturn in Churchill, when we only had 240 some employees, we only had to go, you know, we only went down a half FTE that was terminated, you know, or rifted. We had others that left because their spouse, okay, but we didn't have to do that. That was a choice they made, okay. It worked effectively. And I think that, you know, that's every finance person in every governmental entity, whether it's a city, a county, a school district, wants to be in a place where they don't have to take draconian measures. You know, they don't have to do, you know, chop heads off. You know, they can just do some fine tuning versus taking a significant axe to the budget. So that kind of concludes, you know, my stuff. I'd like to open it up to a dialogue. You know, what questions do you have? And the real hard ones, I'll let Gina answer.
I'll follow up on just what you were just talking about. What's a responsible number? What's the percentage? You know, I totally agree, being in business, that it's better to underestimate your revenues and overestimate your expenses. But what is that? Is that 10% over your projected, you know, expenses? 30%?
94,102.
There you go. You know, I would go back to, yeah, the 94, 103, you know, 102. It's going to vary depending on the economy and the variability. You know, what is the variability with the gold mine industry? And what impact, what percentage, you know, we say what, you know, each community, you know, don't put all your eggs in one basket. What is your economics here? And what is that allocation? You know, and then you turn around and you say, what impact does that have? And what's the likelihood? What's best case scenario, worst case scenario? And how quick would things go to hell? I mean, from a price fluctuation in the gold mine industry, you know, looking back, what's the worst that took place? And what's the best that's taken place? And prepare for the worst and hope for the best. But at the same time, what you don't want is you don't want to have it too damn big of a reserve, you know, where that now all of a sudden, and well, my auditors going into the recession, they said, Alan, I think your reserves are getting too high. You know, you've squirreled money away. He says, you know, I get it. I know what you're doing, but at some point you could be criticized for having too much in reserves. And then shit hit the fan. And then he came back to me 2 years into it and says, wow, you were brilliant. And I said, no, I was lucky. I mean, you know, I wish it was brilliant. But, you know, you put money aside, you know, for those. But I don't know. Gina, what's your take on, and I know your husband's involved in the mining industry, and I assume mining is the greatest volatility here, right?
Yes, absolutely. So I was just going to point out a little bit on the net proceeds, and one thing that I do compared to what the state. So we'll use, for example, I just pulled a projection here. The state projected that this is prior to apportionment, we would receive 19.7 million. Last year we received 14.385. And a lot of this comes down to timing, because in January, the mines have to give their numbers to the state. And then in March, taxation provides us with final revenue projections that we use for the budget next year. But we won't get those net proceeds figures until May of 2023. So in between then, and I've always said this about the accountants for the mining industry, they're wizards. Their job is to get that net number down as low as they absolutely possibly can. So we don't know what gold prices are going to do. We don't know what they're going to purchase that will qualify for an exemption to get that number down. So here at the county, well, Bruce would never put anything in to net proceeds, and I can't recall what Sandra did. So I tried to follow Bruce's lead on that and went back to zero, and taxation got a hold of me and said, no, Gina, you can't put zero. You know you're going to get something. So I put 1.25 million. Because for example, right now, this fiscal year, they've projected we're going to receive 24.4 million. Last year, we received 14.3 million. That's $10 million difference. Who's right? Who's wrong? I'd rather be wrong on the 1.25 million side and come in and say, hey guys, guess what? I was wrong. We're actually getting 14 million and have that additional amount of revenue. So
you also indicated we don't receive it until 10 or 11 months into that next year.
right, the last
I mean,
week of May.
We're giving them credit, essentially. And so we're trying to ballpark some figure that we don't know what it's going to be, and we don't receive until the very end of the year. I mean, it's goofy.
It is. And, back to the comment that Alan just made, you want to be in a position where if that net proceeds number came down really super low and we had budgeted a lot higher, it's the last week of May. Even if we had a RIF at that point, we couldn't make up that kind of difference in a month before the end of the fiscal year.
But like Alan was saying, you could get criticized for having too much in reserve, but you can also get criticized for a budget that's way over your projected revenues.
Yeah, and here's the interesting thing. If I heard Gina right, and I want to restate what she just said, Department of Taxation said you were going to get 19 million in net proceeds. I'm just using the first two digits. The actual was 14 million. If she used 19 million and you guys went ahead and you used 19 million to go put into a big capital project, okay, and now you're 5 million short, you can't go to Department of Taxation and say, where in the hell am I going to get 5 million bucks? They go, whoops, we missed it. And then they went from 14 million actual to 24 million, if I understood. Projected now 24 million. Is it really going to grow 10 million bucks? Boy, I wouldn't count on that. That'd be like buying stock in or doing Bitcoin. You bought Bitcoin at 15,000 and went up to 60, and now it's down to 32, and they go, oh yeah, but it's going to be 500,000 of whatever. Yeah, right. At what point? Yeah. And so then it raises the question that I would ask, is what do you guys do with net proceeds? So net proceeds, do you wait a year or 2 years before that money is spent, and then are you spending it on one-time things? What percentage of that goes towards operations? And do that analysis of how we're going to spend that money, because then at that point that would go to play. Gosh, how much reserve do we have?
And we do part of it, in my opinion, by only budgeting the 1.25 million instead of the full projection amount that the state has, because that way we're not putting that money into the expense of our budget until it's actually into our bank account. So it's forwarding into the next year's beginning fund balance.
So, and one of the things that I would do is, so we would have at the end of the fiscal year, the last meeting of the Board of County Commissioners, June, the third Wednesday in June, for me, when I was at Churchill, we'd have the board adopt a greater than anticipated revenue policy. So that if revenues came in, and the three main ones that we dealt with at Churchill was our geothermal rents and royalties, our federal PILT, payment in lieu of taxes, because that used to fluctuate, and then our CTX. We would have a policy, and what the board would do, what I recommend policy that we always did first was get our stabilization fund up to 10%. And then we went a third, we usually would do it a third to, we may make it to extraordinary repairs this year, extraordinary repairs, compensated absence, and risk management fund. Or we may say a third to extraordinary repairs and maintenance, building reserve, and a third to park and rec or library. Because, you know, we built up our library fund to a real big number so that we didn't have to apportion certain property tax to it. But we would take that resolution or that policy to them every year, how to do that. And I teach a class at the University of Nevada, Reno. And what was funny is Andy Green was the finance guy for the city of Reno. One time I couldn't teach the class and I had GTA and he thought, what's GTA? Grand Theft Auto. I says, no, greater than anticipated. And he says, Grand Theft Auto into capital outlay, extraordinary repairs. But you guys find out what those priorities are. Where do you want to put that money? That extra money. So she budgeted, let's just say she budgeted $2 million, it comes in at 14. So you have 12 million that later on you want to apportion to, you know, you may put some of it to, you know, road department, and that's where you guys set priorities. Where is the priority? Where do you want to put that? And how do you want those investments in services deployed in the subsequent budget in the following year? But don't criticize her and say, oh my God, you missed the budget by $12 million. And she, you know, to me, you know, me being cynic, and if I'd say today, yeah, they're criticizing me missing by, you know, by 12 million bucks. You know, hell, Department of Taxation missed it by a big two. You know, but it comes down to working with you guys. What's the priorities? How do we want to deploy those and under what time frame? And again, don't spend it before you got it. And you know, thank goodness she didn't budget 19 million when it came in at 14. Thank goodness, I hope this year she's not going to put 24 million in the budget, because that would be 10 million more than what you got this year. And how did they, Department of Taxation, you know, how did you come up with 24 million? I'd love to hear that story. You know, and that's a staff type of discussion with them. But, you know, you want to do what's right. You want to be conservative because you don't want to get caught being on $10 million short where you say, you know, we thought we were going to get 24 million and we only got 14. You know, and we were building a new jail with that 24 million or whatever new capital project, you know, major capital project.
On those years that you might be, you know, I'm looking at 2017 was a tough year in terms of everything coming together at a perfect storm. But on those years that you know that you have concerns and questions, would it be valuable for us to use for instance, a rolling 10-year average in order to determine what our history had looked like? What did the economy look like over a 10-year period so that you could make your projections based on what the actuals look like? You know what I'm saying? Or is there too much volatility in that to be able to do that?
I'm not sure I understand your question. I think you're kind of asking then to include kind of what the economy was doing, and that I'm just kind of looking back even through 2020 and 2021. You know, yeah, we came through unscathed compared to a lot of the other entities.
Sure,
I don't know if the economy driver is the right tool for the data point.
Well, what I was thinking of is along the lines of, for instance, when the revenue projections come in for CTX, for instance, or even net proceeds, and we know what, if you look at a 10-year rolling average of what they said they were going to do and what happened, hopefully you're taking the spikes out of the center of it over a 10-year rolling average. And so I'm wondering if you could look at that number, that average, and to get you a lot closer as to what would be a realistic number. And maybe you're doing that already.
I don't go back 10 years, but I do look at the 2 previous fiscal years.
Okay.
And so usually we are between 93 and 95% of what the state is projecting.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chair, what we handed out to you is a spreadsheet that Gina and I have kind of been working on for a while, and it kind of was born out of our budget hearings last year and the frustration. And I guess everything that Alan has talked about here today is encompassed on this page essentially. in terms of that, projection of revenue, projection of expenditures. And if you look at the very bottom line, this is what set everybody off last year. Was at one point, the first time we came through, was an $8 million shortfall was projected. And again, that's with revenues projected, low based on state projections, and expenditures at a higher level, plus maybe 5%. And so, but the reality, if you look at the data, that never happens. Now, could it happen? Of course. I mean, it could happen if the bottom fell out of the economy, it could happen. But, here you're looking at 6 years, and the bottom line is the projected shortfalls you can see at the bottom, and then right above it in green shows you where we actually came in. And if you look at 16 and 17, revenues were down those years, and expenditures stayed pretty solid. If you look under expenditures, under actuals, they're 17,394. The very next year we were down actually in expenditures, so we controlled it pretty well. But in the end, we ended up short in FY16, 1.2 million. We ended up short in 17, 1.6 million. And then we started going down, and now you see we're going up again. The point of that is that if you look at the ending fund balance in yellow there, we have the money there to sustain that. And even in the worst case scenario, if we took a $5.9 million hit, we'd still have an ending fund balance of around 12 million. And so I think the point to me, and when I first came here, I was the most frustrated guy in the world because I was shocked at that same thing. We're shortfalling what? And how can we do that? We can't do that. I was used to balanced budgets in the private sector. And so bottom line is, what I've come to learn is that this is kind of how the game is played. And in my perspective, and I agree with Gina and she's taught me a lot about this, is that, and Alan as well and others, is that you come in with your expenditures based on what your people really think they're going to need. Now, the fact of the matter, that also bears itself out up here. If you look up here under expenditures, we come in, Gina has said this many times, about 11.5, 12% below. There's 1 year that's an outlier in FY19, but generally speaking, we come in about 10, 11% below our expenditures. And that happens for a lot of reasons. You have a lot of fluctuation of personnel, people coming, people going. Positions are left open for a month or 2 or 3. The other part of that is we never get to all the projects we want to do, so we never expend all the money because frankly, even if we were at full staff, we still couldn't get to it. So there's a lot of reasons why we don't fully expend that money every year. And some people look at it and say, well, but aren't you padding your budget? And the fact is, no, what we're saying is, tell us what you need, okay, what you think you're going to do this year. And that's what the budget ends up, we end up cutting it some, right? You end up going through the process and cutting that budget back. But the real key thing is what happens with revenues. And you'll see up above there in the green in the first box is that Gina, in her conservative approach, she ends up being under by 30, 28, 36, 1 year, 41%. But it's because of that unknown. You don't know what's going to come in when and what the economy is going to do for sure. But we're so conservative. And again, I agree with this personally, that if it comes in low, we're still in good shape. We've budgeted well. If it comes in high, we've got excess money. And I think that's what Alan is talking about this. If you look under FY21, the far left column at the bottom in green, this year we came in a surplus of about 1.3 million. And that might be wrong. I was looking at the audit at late hours last night, Gina. But in any case, it was a surplus. And that's where, since we already have, the question was asked, like Alan said, his auditor told him, you got too much in your ending fund balance. Well, Commissioner French has brought this up before. If all of a sudden your constituents said, why do you guys have $25 million in the budget when your expenditures are only about 20 every year? They might say, why are we paying all this extra taxes when you guys have plenty of money? So the point being is that we don't want it to be too high and too low because we're trying to be fair to our citizens about how much money that we take in and how much money we expend. So no more does that big number at the bottom cause me any grief because I see the data here that says we're going to be pretty good. So, and even if something really bad happened, we're in good shape financially. Our ending fund balance is very strong and we could sustain it. Not for too long, but we could sustain it for a year or two.
So one of the things, if I could jump in, Dave. So in 2016, your ending fund balance on this paper that you passed out, it was 17.3 million. And the audited balance in, he dialed in, that's 17.5 million. Okay, that's what the audit shows. So during that period of time, your ending fund balance stayed the same, right? I mean, you had some variability. It went down, it worked its way down, and then now it's gradually working its way back up. Is Gina can I convict her of being more conservative than me? Yeah, I can. But I understand that from the because I don't understand net proceeds. But net proceeds has greater volatility. I mean, just what she just said, they're projecting 24 million versus 14 million actual. There's a lot of variability there. So yeah, if I were in her shoes, I would be probably as conservative as she is. Okay. But if we look at, the ship over, these 6 years, 6 fiscal years, we started the journey at the beginning of fiscal years of 16 at 18.5 million. And 6 years later, we're at 17.5. So we're down $1 million over that period of time. I would argue that the Board of County Commissioners, senior leadership, and all the elected officials have executed a plan of a balanced budget because we're basically the same spot we were 6 years ago in our reserves. Okay. So we've not, quote, overtaxed or overspent, Now to play Monday morning quarterback and start comparing different budget variances, and the mayor of a city that I was at recently jumped all over the auditor and the finance person on a budget variance that was significant. And that particular entity had a windfall because they just signed a major lease agreement and they had a $9 million revenue prepayment that came on this development, and that showed up in the financial statements. And it was like, dude, that happened at a public meeting in April that you guys approved. So you all knew about it. They didn't adjust the budget and they didn't spend the money, but now all of a sudden revenues were, hugely greater than what was budgeted. Come on, we all knew the answer. I mean, the presentation was made, you guys executed that agreement, that governing board executed that agreement, the developer had to pay the money. They paid the money as part of the, the agreement. That's what created the variance. Sometimes I think people can get caught up in these budget to actual original budget, final budget, the budget variances. But look at the steadiness of the ship. The ending fund balance in the general fund has stayed within what I would argue is a relevant range. And Andrea and her group talked about, hey, it's starting to build its way back up, which is good. And I think on the library fund, they said, if you don't right that ship, you got 5 years and you're going to be down to zero. Well, clearly staff's going to right that, it's going to adjust. And this is just one fund. This is the general fund versus the road fund, the library fund, and having to put the collection of all of those different funds into the financial plan, AKA the budget. That's what these folks do to balance the budget and to get it to where it's at. Is she guilty of being conservative? Yeah. But you know what? Under this scenario, she's going to keep you in a better financial position than being too damn aggressive. And then people go spend money that you may not get. And that's where you don't want to be, is using a credit card, spending money that you don't have, and then when the bill comes due, we got to pay interest on a credit card because we're not going to be able to pay it off at the end of the month or the end of the fiscal year.
Got a reason to be that conservative. So this chart was to go back 15, 14, 15.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really went down and it started to come back.
That's when you start tapping the brakes.
That's that 10-year rolling average. Those numbers up.
There is absolutely everything you just said. I think all of us assigned to. I think from sitting on this side of the table, one of the things that concerns me was having a projection that was so dire coming into the beginning of the budget cycle. We took a budget that was pretty austere from the year before. I mean, we didn't expand hardly at all, and we were actually talking about reduction in workforce because everybody sitting in the back here was thinking about, had that $8 million in the back of their mind. How in the hell are we going to balance this? So I think it's important that, Dave used the word, this is how the game is played, or you said it. I think it's important that, and that's why this training today is important, I think, is that it's important that we understand how this whole thing comes together, because from Gina's perspective, she's doing the best she can based on the conservative approach to what happens if it doesn't, what's the good, or, what happens if it goes well, or if it falls off the cliff. You had the scenarios lined out, but I think it's also important that, and I think what it does for us is it allows us to, it gives us the reality check. And when somebody comes in here and says, I want a $5 million building, or the sheriff wants a helicopter. But I think, I just want to say from the conservative side of it as well, that was, you probably saw that last year. It was a tough year, or trying to set that budget together. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands that, this is how the game's played, is that we know, given us a 5-year rolling average, I think we've got six years in front of us right now. It's easy to see how this is going to run. And then we start talking about what the economy's doing, what the state's going to do. And you come in and do a great job of keeping us up to speed in terms of what you're seeing on CTX. That gives us a lot better shot. At least we're lobbing shots into the same baseball field, so to speak.
Well, I think it's easy to look backwards and say, well, it wasn't that bad. But I can remember, I believe it was 2018, of thinking, holy crap, we went from 17 million, I think, and that doesn't reflect where we were at one point. We were like 13 million. So we'd lost $4 million in 2 years in reserves. And we had no way of knowing that it was going to turn around and go the other way. We were open. Yeah. And so that does tend to make you very cautious.
And the good news on that whole thing, because I was right next to you when we were doing this, but the good news, if you look at that actual, the red numbers on the long down here, we went from 1.2 million in the whole 1 year, and then I don't think we took it serious enough. The second year, we were 1.674 million down, and that was, like you were saying, in 2018. We all sat back and went, wait a minute, this doesn't go in the right direction and whatnot. And we made some cuts. We made some changes along that line. And that number came in the following year, 673,000. And then the following year, it wasn't everything to do with how we put a budget together. It's had something to do with it, but it had to do with the economy turning the right direction at the same time and heading back the other way. But I think the importance of this is that we actually have a real strong sense of when we need to put those brakes on, and when we really need to start pumping the brakes on that budget. So this is a great exercise. I'm glad we did it.
And I've always struggled with putting dollars away, like in the capital or the building reserve and capital improvements and stuff. I know we need to. I know it's necessary. But when you're just teetering, you're not putting any money away. Is that a time to put any money on those funds?
So I would argue, you take your 17 million, your ending balance, 17.5 million. You compare that to your actual expenditures of 21 million. That's about 80%. So you have a good reserve in place. That reserve is in the general fund. It's not in the capital fund. So what I would argue that should be done is develop a greater than anticipated policy so that if revenues exceed what was budgeted or exceed it by a certain percentage, because again, she's budgeting conservatively. So let's say she's budgeting at 90% so she knows 100% is a real number, but she's saying 90. And then so anything over 100, let's say that comes in at 107, then you take that 7 and allocate that. Okay, but you keep that 10, the difference between 90 and 100, okay, you keep that in here, okay, because that's what's going to create a green number versus a red number. Okay. And the other thing is that, and I really care a lot about Gina, and I hope what I say is true. I don't know this to be a fact, but I have a feeling that she wasn't advocating. She may have had a budget that was showing 8 million negative, but I don't think she was advocating laying people off because of we have an $8 million deficit. Okay. Because she was telling, in this process, you're saying play in the game, is we're using truth with a little t, where we're being conservative, and we're saying 90 versus, 100, and it comes in at 107. That's great. Okay. She knows it's not going to be 90, unless bad stuff happens. And if bad stuff happens, as soon as you start seeing that, you start adjusting right away. Okay. So, it's not like there's not full disclosure. They know where, whether it's through a 5-year, 3-year, 10-year average of where it's going to be conservatively. Okay. But they're not saying do draconian cuts. What they're saying is don't worry about it. We're going to lose $8 million. You're running a business. You say, I can't run a business and lose $8 million. Holy shit, I can't do that. Why are we doing that at the county? Well, because we're being super conservative. And yeah, if we were to lose 8 million, we started with 17.5. So that would put us at 9.5 million if that really would have happened. But she knows, Dave knows, it would take a black swan event to lose $8 million. And she would be here, well, she's at every meeting anyway. She's following CTX, following the mining and the property tax, your big revenue. She's going to be telling you, all along. Or if a huge unfunded mandate comes down from the state or the federal government, or, something major happens, there's that communication.
Yeah.
Because you all are one big family, one big team. And the department heads, if something happened with the sheriff's office, whatever, they would tell Dave and Gina and Abel, and the whole team would look to address that issue, and you guys would be made aware of it. So it's not as if minus 8 million is going to become a reality without you knowing well in advance.
No, and I hope I didn't come across that way, because Gina and I go back a long way, and I know the expression on her face when it is real. And it was the numbers came in. It was just a column in a projection, and but if you were paying attention to that column and whatnot, and especially if you weren't used to this process and whatnot, it was an oh my God moment, But I think. I think setting these budgets together, doing what she's done in the past is holding that conservative line, I think is fiscally the right thing to do. And I also think having a spreadsheet like this to actually lay out what exactly, so we can see what good versus, we can expect on both ends of the spectrum. But
and for the record, I was criticized by my board during my career every once in a while. In the same way, and it's not criticized, it's constructive criticism, and I take it personal. Obviously, I think Gina and Dave take it personal, and you know what, and I say, thank God they do, because if they did take it personal, that means they don't care, right? And the fact that she called me and she was, Alan, I didn't get a 5-0 vote on my budget, and I'm like, well, what happened? And she explained, and I go, and she goes, and I'm like, well, if I can help provide education where they understand the process. And what I've told my planning director back in Churchill, when she lost, or she had a 2-1 vote, she was devastated that it wasn't a 3-0 vote. And I said, you know what, when we don't get a 3-0 vote, it's because staff, we didn't do our job to understand where your issues are. And, and having newly elected boards, because I think that the 2 new members, with all due respect,
You can't pick on me like that.
yeah, they ask great questions, and we've not had an opportunity to educate them, and their concern is valid.
Absolutely.
If I was a newly elected guy or gal, and it shows up at $8 million loss without understanding, I'm not going to criticize a negative vote on that, quite honestly. If it wasn't explained to me, so what we're trying to do is provide better information, and a non-unanimous vote is not a negative thing. I get over it. But I can tell you how many times it happened in my career, and sometimes it was for political reasons, other times it was for technical reasons. If it's political reasons, I get it. If it's technical reasons, then I failed to understand. I failed to educate, and sometimes you just have differences of opinion, and that's great too. So.
One
So-
thing I do want to talk about, we've got a budget coming up. Now, if I'm reading this right, the actual change is we have 1,354,986 in the green, so it means that we did well, and she does well, believe me. I back her at 100%.
So your revenues exceeded your expenses by 1.3 million bucks.
Okay, but I've got a problem, and I need to talk about it a little bit, because we got a whole basement full of stuff here that is glued together with Band-Aids. So if we were to spend a lot of money on that, or say we spend another $1 million on getting that back up where it belongs, then it's going to be different. I'm not saying that we need to do that right now, but we have to fix it. And the reason I say that, we just did a comprehensive look at the courthouse, and that's what the engineers told us, that we're gluing it together.
From a capital project standpoint?
Yes.
Yeah.
Not on the capital project.
It's on
On
renovations.
just fixing our stuff that
Yeah.
we haven't fixed for years because of this other.
Yeah.
So, that's where it's at. But
And that's an effect, I would argue, and I'm not going to speak for your senior leadership, but that's an effective use of positive growth in ending fund balances, capital items, whether it be, the new software program for, a department, if it's fixing the roof, one-time type expenditures that will have a long-term impact. Those are good. That's a good use. Now, hiring 15 new employees, FTEs, and getting that number beyond this, into the 75 to 80% of your total, ouch, because that's an ongoing thing. But if you have to drop 3 million, 2 million in courthouse improvements, or you have to go out and build a new jail because of, code violations or, those type of things, that's part of the capital plan. And that would be an effective use of the 1.3 is addressing those deficiencies. And it may take 2 years, 3 years to complete those tasks.
Along that line, Commissioner Haas, you just described something that I remember having a conversation a lot of years ago when we were talking about funding the dispatch center. And, it was exactly that same thought, is that as we were doing better then, obviously, in terms of the finances and whatnot, but as we started rolling along and then the in-fund balances were getting stronger, the conversation, it was during a retreat, the conversation came along, it's like, okay, what percentage of that we're putting into a capital improvement fund toward that dispatch center? Because at the time, it was what we needed the most. And that's really how that happened. That is kind of, that's how we funded at least the greatest majority of it. It came in over budget. We had to come up with some more. But the bottom line was the lion's share of it that's how we put that together. But
that's not what I'm concerned with or talking about now. Not capital improvements. You're going to have to improve it. Let's put it this way. We're not going to have any heat. We're not going to have air conditioning. We're not going to have a lot of different things.
Well,
So
I call it
if we
capital
don't-
improvement,
if
but
we
that
don't take
includes all
that
of
into
that.
consideration. I mean, we have money left over, and that's great. So let's start funneling some of that back into fixing up what we already have, so we don't lose it. I mean, capital improvements, the dispatch center was a necessity. And you did very, very well in funding it and very, very well in putting it in there, okay? But keeping the courthouse, it's like a sink at home. okay, and it's leaking and it's not doing its job and stuff, you replace that.
Well, I don't disagree with you on that, and you probably know how strong I've been toward trying to pour money back into this investment of this, because this is the crown jewel in Humboldt County. But maybe using the word capital improvement is the wrong word to use for you. We lumped all of those projects together, whether it be a new building, or maintenance of blacktopping a parking lot. But we were trying to pour money into an account that we could actually look down the road to tap. I would say right now, we could argue that a percentage of these end fund balances should go into some sort of an account, call it capital improvement if you want, that is going to eventually address infrastructure in this building. It's going to address some of the work we have to do with the courts on the other side.
That's good, Jim. You just got it, okay? That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is that we need to look at that in the budget that's coming up, okay? And we need to get that done, which hasn't been being done. But, you know, as a first timer, looking at what you guys have done over this whole layout here, you've done wonderfully well. And I'll stand up there and tell it to anybody. So, and all I'm saying is I want to bring to your attention that there's some stuff in the basement that needs to be fixed. So let's look at that in the budget, okay?
I think we're all on that page, Tom. I guess it's choosing the priorities where I think we have to spend money may not be where you think. Ken might be different. I think 90% of the time we can agree on things. 10% of the time we don't. And then that's where we argue it out. Winners and losers.
So I think the takeaway for me at this point is learning what your direction is, or being a little bit more comfortable on both sides. You know, I usually come in and tell you the percentage that I've budgeted the revenues at, or how I'm doing net proceeds. So maybe we'll start off the budget workshops by talking about that once I've got the preliminary projections, but I'll be honest with you, until we start seeing the finals, because they will change, and they do change. The next thing is to share with you is another reason why I like to budget so conservatively on the revenues is, and here we are again, we're getting ready to go into negotiations, and we've already had the units call for the financials, and they want to see this. And Ellen and I were just discussing last week, I think one of the most difficult items that's facing local governments is inflation and how we're going to manage that. And so I think that's going to be a key component of this year's budget workshops and discussion, and things to keep in mind. And then I do really like the idea, I know you said you guys would meet, the GTA meeting would be in June. Question, why wouldn't you wait until like September after you get your final CTX? Or do
We
you,
would do it in June for the following year. So the audit, so now you have the audits come out. Okay, we know, so your beginning fund balance, or your ending fund balance, is a current year budget beginning balance. The budget that was submitted, let's just pretend that the budget said it was 15 or 16.5 million. So it was $1 million less. You could do a greater than anticipated $1 million augmentation to address the Band-Aids that need to be done. Let's say there's 3 capital projects, we want to replace the HVAC system. We want to replace whatever that priority order is. You guys, you figure that out, how you're going to quote spend that additional $1 million, from a shopping list of priorities. And then the board, the staff makes a recommendation that we, use that money for these 3 things. And you guys say, well, yeah, we agree with 1 and 2, but instead of 3, we want to do number 4 and 5 is the same value as 3. And, and the board votes, and boom, that's what you do. Then you march on. But we wait till the end of a lot of times we wait till the end of the fiscal year to true things up. Even though the board, if you've taken that action to move forward with capital to cleaning up the courthouse, Band-Aids for X number of dollars. And Dave and company and contractors are working on that stuff. We'll get that cleaned up by the end of the fiscal year, and using those resources, the greater than anticipated revenues, or beginning fund balance, to allow those expenditures, those investments in services, or in this case, in the facilities, to happen.
I don't know. I'll get them all.
Yeah, whenever, yeah.
Does anybody know where the
Yeah,
expenditures
have
went?
we seen the expenditures? They're missing in action.
on my shelf, yes.
Oh, is that what you?
Okay.
You're looking around.
He took them all. We had to look at it for.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, totally.
My staff was sweating, I'm sure.
Well, I appreciate you guys lending me the opportunity to come here and, give my perspective. That's one of the things that the pool has, Wayne Carlson, as a pool executive director for Pool Pack, has allowed me to do some financial leadership type programs, because the more financially stable the members are, the better you guys are, managing your public resources, the better that, the whole state is, in our membership, because you own us. So thank you for allowing me to come and editorialize my opinion. And just because it worked in Churchill doesn't mean it's going to work in, in Humboldt. But, what you guys have been doing has been very effective. There's some tools that you could implement that could assist, continue to assist.
Yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time, Alan. I appreciate it for it. It was nice it was a good opportunity for us to run through this. It's tough to do, but it's timely for us. So I really appreciate it.
You bet.
And then Alan forwarded these ahead of time, the numbers that he used. So I've got a copy for everybody, so you can kind of see where he got a lot of the state's numbers from.
Okay, great. Thank you. Gina, thank you too.
Oh, you're welcome. And thanks to Alan, like I said, for coming out, and really appreciate that. Sometimes I think it helps to somebody else articulating in different methods that might help.
Yeah, thanks, Alan.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
We still have public comment.
Again?
Yeah, because oh, you did it before?
I did it
Okay.
before we went into this. So.
All right, then I guess you can adjourn.
I can take public comment again. This is going to be item 21 and a half. And we're going to take public comment again. Is there any additional public comment? Not hearing any additional public comment. We're going to adjourn this meeting.
There is one, Jim.
You get one?
There's something here.
Could you state your name for the record, please?
This is Commissioner Hill. I just wanted to thank Alan for his demonstration today. It was very engaging. I got a lot out of it. Fortunately, I had to step out to catch a flight, but hop back on Zoom here.
Great, thanks. Any additional public comment? Not hearing any additional public comment, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you.
Commissioner Hill, I'll put one of this spreadsheet that we're talking about in your box.
Okay, Dave, thanks.
Ugly frozen face.